Okay, so I think we can probably make a start. So thank you very much to everybody who has given up an hour over their Friday lunch to join us to talk through the webinar today. So really excited to have a fantastic panel with us of speakers who we'll introduce in a minute. The topic which we're going to focus on is consumer duty, and it's an interesting one because it's obviously been headline news within the financial services sector, but again, the building society sector specifically for about the last 18 months now. And whilst we reached the July 2023 deadline, which was quite a significant milestone, consumer duty is definitely not a once and done regulation, basically. And we've got the next phase in July 2024, whereby the FCA are going to start looking at closed products and compliance against closed products. So we thought it'd be really good to bring together some of the experts in docStribute, some of our industry expertise from a Woodhurst perspective, and hopefully give you guys some insight into what we're seeing and some of the things to think about within your societies as well. So if we move on to the agenda for today, we're going to kick off with a very quick icebreaker poll. We'll cover off the introduction to the various speakers. Phil Shelley from docStribute is going to take us through their slides around improving customer support, engagement and understanding. Ben Nadel is going to talk to us around some of the analysis post-deadline and things to think about. We'll launch into a panel discussion and we'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So there is the ability, I believe, on the webinar to add your questions as we go along so that you make sure you don't forget them. Feel free to use that functionality as we go through, and we'll also have the option to ask specific questions at the end of the session. So if I move on to the poll, so we thought we'd just ask this to see where the priorities are for people on the webinar from a consumer duty perspective. So are the main priorities around tech development, pricing and fair value, better MI and reporting capability, or improved customer engagement? So I'm hoping the poll should launch on your screen now and should be able to allow you to provide answers. Not sure if that's working or not. We'll just give it 20 seconds.
It's working.
I can see it, Luke.
Yeah.
Okay, good, cool. I can't see anything, but
you want me to say the results as they're coming in? We've had 29 responses, and it looks like 39% of the people are saying better MI and reporting capability, closely followed by 37% saying improved customer engagement. So those are the two clear winners on the 30 responses.
Well, that's quite interesting, because I think quite a lot of what we're going to talk through today is actually around improved customer engagement and better MI and reporting capability. So very topical responses there. If we move on to the speakers, so this is the panel which we put together today. Thank you everybody who's taking part and has joined us on the journey for this. It's been great to work with you guys. If we do a very quick round of introductions, so I'll cover off myself quickly, and then we'll move left to right along the screen. So Luke Casey, I founded Woodhurst along with Ben and our co-founder Josh back in 2019. We're a boutique consultancy focused on tech transformation for financial services institutions. So we work a lot with building societies around helping make sure that they've got the right tech, either core platform, origination solutions, digital front end, but also tech from a more bespoke sort of specific standpoint, such as around supporting with consumer duty. So we work with a number of societies in the sector and are looking to continue along that and engage with as many societies as possible. Ben, over to you.
Very quick from me because Luke has said most of it. But just to add to that my role at Woodhurst is mainly going to see the building societies, talking with people that work there. I spend quite a bit of time in the boardrooms for our clients and other boardrooms. So I think the insight I'm hoping to bring today, and I think we've got many people on the panel who know a lot more about the subject than me, but what I would like to relate today is just some of the things that we're hearing at the excos and boardrooms of the different building societies and elsewhere around consumer duty.
Perfect. Phil, over to you.
Thanks. I'm chairman of docStribute, but before that I spent 25 years in investment banking, working at UBS, Goldman Sachs, and finally at Barclays as a vice chairman. All senior advisor to many companies, but particular focus on the largest financial services companies in the UK. Since then, I've been a public company chairman for a wealth management business, so I understand that board perspective. Interestingly, that was a business that had been investigated by the FCA before my arrival, so I also understand how difficult it is sometimes working with the FCA and the scrutiny that brings. But I think that's given me a great deal of insight into the FCA and how it operates. I'm now chairman of 3 small companies, one of which is docStribute. All are tech-based, all related to financial services, and particularly with a regulatory focus. So I think that gives me a sort of broad experience of financial services, both as a practitioner, a senior manager, a board role, and with responsibility, obviously, for the regulatory agenda, and also the challenges of innovating and integrating tech, all with a very regulatory bias. So I hope that all comes out in this discussion.
Perfect. And Manila?
Hi there, I'm the Chief Information Officer at Newcastle Building Society. As well as a regional building society, we're also an outsourcer for other banks and building societies. We run the savings management side for a number of banks and building societies throughout the UK. I've been in financial services now, I think around 25 years, and worked with a number of different types of financial services throughout that period of time, predominantly in digital and tech type of roles. But I like to think that I'm very close to the customer and the end needs that we're trying to solve through the technology that we've been building. So really looking forward to the panel discussion and hearing everyone's views.
Perfect. And last but not least, Alexa.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Dr. Alexa Haynes. I'm Head of Research for the Nile Group. I've been working in or with financial service clients for my entire career, including my PhD, and I feel like I have been championing the drivers behind really what consumer duty sits on for most of that time. So if we just think about placing the customer at the heart of organisations, really understanding the value that drives from it, creating accessible services and working with vulnerable customers. And at Nile, we've been helping several clients across different sectors within the financial services group along their consumer duty journey and in order to get to that compliant state. And they've all been at different points in that journey with different needs and different challenges. So I'll be sharing some of those learnings with you all today, which I'm really excited about.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's going to take us through the latest view from himself and docStribute around where we are today and some of the key elements to focus upon ahead of the next July deadline, which is approaching.
Thanks. I mean, I'm going to keep this fairly brief because we've all had plenty of consumer duty input, but I mean, I think it's important whenever you think about consumer duty to sort of start at the beginning and the sort of the overall intentions of the FCA when they drafted consumer duty. And I think it was very interesting that they called out the number of customers in financial services in terms of the trust they have with the financial services industry as a key KPI. So when they say that 41% of adults have confidence in the UK financial services industry, that's a very important metric for them, and it's clearly where they're very focused and arguably where they've been trying to trying to go for some time. I think the other aspect of consumer duty that's very important to remember is that the resource split between selling and supporting needs to be much more evenly balanced, and that clearly isn't something they think has been happening in the past. And then obviously the proactivity of consumer duty. So we're all about trying to stop bad outcomes rather than just measure them and deal with them. And then finally, I think they've learned the lesson of cultural change and trying to achieve it. And so they're very focused on the board. What's the board measuring and how that messaging goes out to the rest of the organisation. Therefore, how much of a cultural change is actually being affected in each institution. And I think that's obviously the hardest thing to change and will take the longest time. But hence the reason why, and I'm sure you've all seen the speech from Nisha Arora back in November, the not once in done discussion is very much that this is a start of a journey and it's likely to be a fairly long one. But more importantly, where are we today and where are the FCA focused? Now, clearly, there have been a number of different pronouncements and engagements from the FCA, most recently the Sheldon Mills discussion at the end of February. And I'm just going to focus on two sort of key areas they're highlighting. The first one is price and value. And clearly, this is in the news in terms of things like St James's Place and Phoenix and other organisations that are managing this issue. But clearly, the products and services need to offer fair value question, which is a key part of consumer duty, is something that's getting a lot of focus. And they called out at the end of February the reliance on market benchmarking that is currently being used to justify fair value, which is not acceptable in their view, and that they're looking for a much more of a bottom-up analysis of the product you're selling the customer and how that changes over time. So quite a significant change, and one that I'm sure will continue to be in the news, and I suspect likely to be the predominant area for the FCA in the near term, just they focus on actually starting to deal with the issue with a little bit more of a vengeance. On the second aspect, I think, is also one that they're calling out, and again, Sheldon talked about it in February, is the idea of customer communication. And the fact that you need to maximise engagement and understanding for each customer. And increasingly, that's becoming a conversation that's really quite bespoke and quite personalised. I mean, they use the concept that requirement to generally engage with customers, particularly the elusive ones, which, as we all know, is a challenge in financial services. But that lack of engagement that we currently have, particularly, and I'll come back to this, on regulatory information, is something that they're trying to change so that they can improve the understanding of customers to the greatest degree. And again, it's never going to be perfect. It's a journey. How do you improve it over time? But it's clear that the FCA are very focused on that communication channel. What are you communicating? Is it easy to understand? Are you communicating in a form that your customer is likely to read it and is reading it? And then, of course, measuring all that. And I think that's the bit that the FCA increasingly are going to be focused on, and clearly the requirement to produce board packs by the end of July at the latest. And I know many of you will have already done this, but those board packs are going to be looked at very closely by the FCA because they're probably the start of the cultural journey in many ways. And what are you monitoring? And does that give the FCA confidence that you're on a journey to improve outcomes and to prevent bad outcomes? That, I think, is going to be a key focus. So if I turn to the next slide and just think about where consumer duty is taking financial services as a whole in a little bit more of a holistic view, I think regulators have been trying to achieve good outcomes for some time, as you'd expect. And we've all been through the last decade or so of really quite specific legislation and regulation. But I think they recognise it hasn't delivered the increase in trust that they might want. Now, I would stress, obviously, the building society space will have a higher proportion of customers who trust them mainly because of branches or mutual status or whatever it may be, but they'll be in a better place because their contact with customers may be better than perhaps some of the larger organisations or even organisations in wealth. But that's still very much a focus for the FCA is driving that trust level. And I think part of that comes from, and this is a view, but I think widely held, that the financial services industry has been largely product focused for a very long time. And that has led to making products relatively generic, very efficient, and trying to maximise the efficiency of the organisation in product production, rather than necessarily focusing on the customer in a genuinely customer-centric way. So I think that aspect is something that they're obviously looking to change. And as I say, I think that inevitably means you go down a relatively bespoke and personalised route for each customer, whether it's vulnerable customers, whether it's different types and cohorts of customers, or whether it's individual customers. There's clearly a requirement to be very specific about the products you're selling to each customer, and is it the right thing for them, and therefore likely to have a good outcome on the point of sale, but also a good outcome as that product matures. And those are challenging things to do. And therefore, I think the customer engagement strategy needs to be really good and really strategic, and is essential. And I think the FCA will be looking at how firms are trying to improve their engagement and understanding over time. Again, back to the board pack, the data you're collecting, how are you monitoring that, and where are you on that journey, and are you making progress in improving that? Now, of course, bespoke and personalised communication is incredibly challenging without a lot of tech and a lot of tech help. And clearly in financial services, there are already some very bespoke customer solutions, particularly for selling. But I think that's going to have to become much more universal. And I'll talk about that a little bit as the chairman of docStribute. But I think the use of tech, the customer interaction, behaviour, circumstances, not just to sell well, but also support well, I think is going to be a key focus for the FCA going forward. And they're clearly signalling that, as I say, in Shelton's latest missive. So I think capturing that data, using it to best effect to achieve good outcomes and prevent bad ones, is going to be where the FCA are very focused. And I think that sums it up in many ways. Is the FCA is looking for you to prevent bad outcomes, not to manage them, and to do everything you can to prevent it from the point of customer engagement onwards. So I think that's sort of what the comments I would say about consumer duty. A shameless plug for docStribute, obviously, is I think we're very focused on trying to help companies increase that customer engagement, particularly with regulated documents. And we're doing that because we've come up with a technology solution to create immutable documents by using distributed ledger technology. What does that mean? It means basically you can communicate with your customers in regulated documents, or using regulated documents, in a way that now enables you to engage with the customer in the way they want to be engaged. So you're not forcing them to do something, go to a portal, navigate that, find a document, etc. You're sending it to them because we are providing the durable medium you need to do that. And that means that we're getting very high open rates. It says 75% here, but we're already over 80% and growing with our customers today. And the advantage of it is obviously once you start to do things digitally and you can communicate regulated documents in a digital form, you save a lot of money. So there's a huge cost saving. And what's interesting for our customers today is immediately, with very little integration, you can start communicating to your customers in email, in text, in messaging, in a way that they will engage with, and therefore you can drive your engagement and understanding immediately, with a view to improving it over time. And clearly, as we do this, we're very focused on monitoring who opens it, what do they do when they open it, what do they click on, how long do they spend on different things, and providing them with tools to understand those documents, like AI tools and so on, which will definitely improve the engagement and definitely improve the understanding. And that's what we're trying to do, is help firms basically improve engagement and understanding. A very brief word on how it works. It effectively uses the best encryption capability you can to keep the documents secure. It uses distributed ledger technology to provide that durable medium, which is all important and has been for many years. And then it, as I say, allows you to deliver it to the customer in a way that is engaging and will get high rates of open rate and engagement among your customers. So you're solving one of the biggest problems we have in financial services today, which is getting regulated documents to customers in a way they're going to understand it. And of course, we monitor everything because we can, and that will allow boards downwards to understand whether you are able to engage, whether you are engaging, and how you're improving that by using different techniques in terms of how do you write your documents, how do you communicate them, what medium can you use to make them easier to understand, how do you use modern technology like AI to help customers understand documents. All of those things you can measure, and therefore you can continue on this journey with a view to improving your engagement and understanding. And the final slide just says that it's very cheap, it's very green, and it's very easy to implement, and it gives the customer a much, much better experience because you're getting to the customer in a way that they want to interact. But I would stress it's very easy to implement, and it's very straightforward to add to your journey of improving engagement and understanding. But that's probably enough of a plug from docStribute.
No, thank you very much, Phil. So if we move on to the next section around post-deadline consumer duty analysis, Ben, do you want to take us through your views and thoughts here?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So I think what's been really interesting for us over the last 3 or so years working with building societies is we're approaching it, I think, from a similar position in that we believe that everyone should have access to better financial solutions. And I think that's why Woodhurst and building societies have fit so nicely together. And the challenges that we've heard when talking more broadly than consumer duty, I think actually they sort of come to a point when you look at consumer duty here and you think that actually we know already as building societies that our core purpose and value is to deliver the best outcome for the member and not to drive profit. So I think from that perspective, we hear from building societies, we hear from the regulators that you're very much at the top of the list when it comes to people that are probably already behaving in a way that most closely links and aligns to the intent of the consumer duty regulation. But that's really partly the problem. So we've really seen here and heard from societies that a key challenge that they're facing is identifying relevant data points that allow you to track progress against the consumer duty outcomes. And this is also limiting your reporting capabilities, which makes it difficult to demonstrate the compliance to the regulators. I think it was good to see that 37% of people who voted on the poll also thought the same, that this is a real key issue. So I think Manila said the same when we had our prep call. Everyone is probably of an opinion that we know what we need to do. We need to be regularly updating customer journeys. We want to understand the pain points. We know what some of those are. We're doing things to address them. We want to be better at measuring those pain points. And we want to be marketing to our customers better. So we're probably coming at it from a point of view that we're on the upward trend. We're doing good things in the first place. We're taking steps. Some building societies selecting technology like docStribute to take to the next level. But I think if we move on to the next slide, Luke, for me, it really comes into what more can we do to perhaps reflect both to ourselves, which is important, but also to the regulator, what we're doing to address it. So there are 4 things on here which I'll briefly touch on that from the conversations we've been having, finding out what some of the people are probably at the forefront of taking action are doing, and combining that with what we've seen work well. These 4 things I think are worth touching on that you can perhaps take away and think about how you might be doing at your society. And of course, if you wanted to talk in more detail about any of these in relation to what you're doing, then we would love to do that probably off the webinar, because it might be very specific to you. But the first point is data discovery. So here we think that you can actually identify the consumer duty related data points that you're not currently using in order to build new data pools and map those into your data architecture and systems. So that's really about understanding what data you do actually already have at your fingertips that's going to be driving really the MI and reporting and results that you can then measure against. So I think that data discovery is a really important first step, one which I think many of you may already be on, and I think one that continues to be a challenge though to navigate and to get right and not boil the ocean when it comes to all the data that you might think that's relevant. The second one is bespoke customer surveys. So I think a lot of building societies that we've worked with are running or part of initiatives like Smart Money People and other data sources. But I think the ones, and we see this at large building societies perhaps, where there might be more resource available. But I think it can also be done on a budget where you can design a customer survey that's tailored to your society, and that can be aimed at producing a view, a data point on each consumer duty outcome. And that will really help you understand which customer journeys need improving the most, and also how to redesign them. So with so many customer journeys, I think just taking the view that, oh, we need to improve them all to get closer to where we would like to be in relation to consumer duty is an overwhelming task for many. So I think through these surveys, that gives you the member-led approach of how you're going to prioritise the actions that you're going to take on those improvements. And yes, sometimes technology is needed, but often not. It is just a change to the way that you might be doing something that can actually result in a quick win. But then, of course, you'll be adopting new technology as well in your society. So how do you best deploy that in relation to those improvements you want to make? And then there's third, custom metrics. So a lot of you on this call are having joined it, and who we've asked to join us today, I think are close to the consumer duty regulation. And it's by far the most extensive one. So I think what's great about it is a lot of people are getting closer to it. But it's about developing the custom metrics that you can use to internally track outcomes and demonstrate compliance to regulators. So in simplest terms, knowing exactly what to measure that's then going to translate through into your reporting to the regulator. And I think what we're seeing is it's often custom metrics that are going to be required there. Probably, yes, some of the things you're already measuring, but definitely more things and tailoring them to consumer duty. And in a lot of cases, that can be a quick win. Finally, your MI dashboard. So what you can do is you can build custom MI dashboards, depending on how your reporting estate, your MI tools look at the moment. But knowing what a lot of you are dealing with at the moment, you'll have the ability to do this to a certain extent. Those of you on the more modern MI reporting suites will better probably do this even greater. And that's taking that data that you've defined and giving you that clear and digestible view, whether it's at ExCo level, board level, or to the regulator. And it will make the external reporting far simpler and almost let that take care of itself. So it's not a constant asking yourself, oh, have we sent out a survey? Have we done this? And having to stay on top of it. It becomes just part of the process that will be running in the background, and you can sleep well at night. So I think those are 4 actions. I think just one to add to that quickly that didn't make it onto the slide is I heard it at a conference earlier in the week, actually just asking your technology providers that you're working with today what tools they have that can help with consumer duty. A lot of technology providers and the ones that you'll be working with have built tools, and it just might be a question that you're not using them. So that's sometimes a very simple and quite useful thing to be doing if you're sitting in consumer duty champion role and asking your colleagues in tech, or if you have the relationship directly with the technology provider, just asking them what they can do to help. And yeah, I think we'll leave it at that so we can get onto the panel. Hopefully that's helped.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Good to get some practical tips which people can look to progress straight after a call. So moving on to the panel. So I'm quite keen, Manila, to kick off with yourself, given your role at Newcastle. So how's the journey been from a Newcastle perspective around compliance with consumer duty? And do you have any, I guess, tips and tricks which have worked well at Newcastle, which you'd like to share with the audience?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I think so with most of the people in the audience, and if we're talking about building societies, consumer duty in general, I think it plays to our strengths. So at Newcastle, the way I would describe our journey with consumer duty is that it's been comfortable but not complacent, because a lot of what the focus is around being owned by our customers, by our members, it is around ensuring that the products and the services that we provide to them are in their interests, that there's consistently fair value around the pricing and the servicing that we provide. but it's very important not to be complacent and assume because you have a culture that truly is customer centric and is focused on the end consumer, that it means that you're ticking every box. So I think and the focus around ensuring that, you know, we've done certainly a lot of compliance checks around the products and the services and the experience that we provide to our consumers. There has been change that we've made, both in terms of our processes with our colleagues and within technology, but importantly, it's around the culture, I think. And of course, at Newcastle, we work with other financial institutions, so it's been a really interesting experience to speak with our clients around what their interpretations are of the duty and what changes or enhancements that they may want to see. But in actual fact, I think that what is being delivered from Newcastle as a building society has stood us in really good stead for where we wanted to get to.
Perfect. Thanks, Manila. And you mentioned, obviously, for building societies, it's a little bit different to some other financial services institutions. Alexa, you mentioned that you are working with other types of FS firms across the industry. How do you see it being different from a building society versus non-building society perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of different factors, but I do think probably the predominant one is that customer focus and just the setup of the community orientated organizational structure, the fact that it's members before profit. And I think that really does help building societies interpret and implement their consumer duty requirements at a slightly easier level in certain aspects of it. For instance, the customer support and the customer understanding elements. Because if you compare that with some of the larger retail banks, for instance, yes, they've actually had to, over the last few years, basically get to know their customers better to be able to design, picking up on Phil's point earlier, design better products so they can make more profits. They've had to adopt user-centered design practices. They've also, on the flip side, spent years optimizing, digitizing, automating practices to become more efficient and cost saving. Again, with that eye on the profit. So if I can just give you a short example, late last year, which conducted a survey with members of the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers and found half of disabled people who contacted customer service teams were unhappy with the issue and how it was dealt with. 2 in 5 were dissatisfied with how easy it was to find contact information, and then with the contact options available themselves. So it's not about necessarily thinking that talking to a human is necessarily going to be the right option for all the situations, but it's offering accessible experiences that cater to the needs of your customers. And I think building societies have more opportunities with their high street presence and that focus on customers and their needs being at the heart of the business. And I think what's quite stark in that Which survey is that those percentages of half and 2/3 being unable to or unhappy with the response from the customer service organizations is almost double that of the generic population. So I think just reflecting on the services and the support that you can offer customers to allow that everybody can get the answers they need in the time that they need them to be able to be treated fairly within their own limits and capabilities is going to be crucial. But I do think that connection with customers is going to be at the heart of meeting some of these pillars of consumer duty.
Definitely. And Ben, we've obviously, within the building society sector, we've got a huge difference in the 43 building societies, all the way from a Penrith up to some of the big 5. Are you seeing different approaches in the boardroom and different approaches to compliance with consumer duty across those different sizes of firms? Because there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach for this building society sector.
No, that's right. And I think there are some challenges, obviously, the bigger financial institutions have, the top building societies, some of them almost being as big as the big high street banks and having to deal with so many customers. And that volume obviously presents different challenges. And I think when you go down to the other end of the sector, you find that typically that lower volume of members means that there are statistically probably less customer personas, but even so, not just less customer personas maybe, but they can be very clear on their demographic. And I think that sometimes brings with it you know, a calibration between the fact that they don't probably have the budget or the resources that the big ones have, but the problem for them is scaled down to their size. So I think definitely not one size fits all approach, and we're seeing a lot of differences to the application of technology across the sector, but that doesn't necessarily always link to size. It sometimes links to investments that have been made over the years. Yeah, I think from a goals and aims point of view, very common, and we do seem to hear the same things. And I think the bigger ones are equally probably under a little bit more scrutiny from the FCA, and that seems to show. But the great thing is there's definitely no difference in the sort of drive and ambition to get to those outcomes, and potentially maybe one could argue, and it's yet to be seen, that some of the small ones will be able to really deliver on some of the consumer duty outcomes that they're aiming for, because they're small and things take a bit less time to roll out at an organisational level. So I think really excited about that those things will probably all balance each other out, and as a sector it will continue to be a leader on the consumer duty outcomes.
And you've definitely got a more personalised approach at some of the smaller building societies, which makes it, I guess, a bit easier to live and breathe and demonstrate the compliance.
Yeah, and let's not forget the branch point, because I think that's come up a lot recently, and rightly so. If you think about the experience someone can have when they go into a branch, I don't think we should have. I think people have given up arguing that you're going to be able to deliver the same level of personal service digitally. I think as a digital transformation consultant, it's tempting to want to argue that. And I think it's not necessarily, branch might not always be the right place to be delivering a particular transactional service. And I think we've all agreed that for many years. But I think what's the most encouraging thing to see is how we're always told that we want to be opening more branches, not closing them. And you see that often in those difficult, stressful financial periods, people come into branch, and that's where probably the most standout consumer duty experiences, I would say, are delivered. Of course, they've also delivered over phone and can be done digitally. But in those times of stress where it's the most vital, the branch is playing a really vital role. And I think we shouldn't go through this webinar without mentioning the significance and importance of the branch in consumer duty outcomes for building societies.
And I was going to say, just to build on that, I think that really helps with that adaptability that organisations are going to have to exhibit, because there is no one size fits all. And I think that's why it's important not to think about vulnerabilities or a certain type of customer in a certain bubble. It's actually thinking about, excuse me, needs, and focusing on the needs of the customers and what they need in a particular situation. And organisations are going to have to flex and adapt, because when customers' situations or circumstances do change, which they do, you will have to offer up an alternative avenue. So what might be the branch, a suitable support requirement going into the branch at one point in the same customer's life may totally change for maybe they become physically enabled or disabled at different points across their lifetime. So I think being able to switch and flex is going to be crucial. But I think the ability to have those channels available at the minute, I think, puts building societies at a greater point in front of other financial services.
The branch debate personifies the issues that consumer duty brings to the fore, and that branches have been disappearing for the major organisations in the pursuit of cost cutting, efficiency, profits, whatever it may be, but at the cost of the customer. The consumer duty tells you to do exactly the opposite. So I think it's a very good example of how actually those people who still have branches may well be at a significant advantage. And consumer duty gives people lots of opportunity here. I mean, if it's about the customer and you're already very customer centric, as most building societies are, that gives you an opportunity, I think, as your customer. I mean, we have customers who are small building societies and we have tier one banks, and they all have much the same problem. But the tier one banks' biggest problem is just big tech legacy, trying to make things work within that context, and the fact that they've lost a lot of their traditional customer communication channels, branches amongst others. So it's very hard. In some ways, it's very hard for the big organizations to make this change. The smaller you have, although you may have less money, you may actually be in a better place to start off with and have some really good customer engagement tools that are already there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil. One of the top 5 building societies we're doing a piece of work for at the moment, they're moving more customers to the digital channel, which is great. Their digital channel is improving. I think something we see common across all building societies, a desire to want to improve the digital engagement. But it does bring a concern around, okay, more customers moving down the digital channel. Will we lose our ability to have those touch points to ask the questions and deliver the right outcomes? So I think, again, it's thinking through the application of the technology and then going that step further and saying, okay, so yes, they might be interacting with a digital channel. Can we use open banking as an example to get a view on that customer's financial well-being and be proactive? Because customers actually really resonate well when you contact them proactively, because you've identified that there might be an issue. They don't perceive that to be Big Brother and intrusive if it's done in the right way. And I think there'll be a lot of big banks out there that won't be doing that because it's a cost and it might erode the bottom line. Whereas the great thing is with the building societies, they're thinking, yes, we're moving with modern technology. What more can we do with the data at our disposal, like open banking data, to be more proactive on the digital channels, just in the way that we're proactive when someone comes into branch and we make sure that they get a fantastic experience through that conversation. So I think that's really encouraging to see, and something that is available to all building societies of all sizes on any budget, the open banking data for their customers and the ability to be proactive through the digital channels.
Sorry, just last on I mean, the customer engagement strategy of old needs to be very different from what it is going to have to be in the future. And by customer engagement strategy, it's a very strategic piece of work, not just because of consumer duty, but what do I want to do with each of my channels? What am I going to use them for? And how is that going to ensure maximum engagement, whilst at the same time making sure that I'm as efficient as I can be within the context of driving engagement, but also efficiency. So there are some things that will work very well digitally and some things that work very well in branch. How do I put all that together? And that's a pretty strategic discussion. The consumer duty regulation and the FCA, as they start to look at board packs and how they discuss consumer duty, will really focus on. I don't think it's going to be good enough, and they've already said this, to have consumer duty as a regular item on the board agenda. It needs real focus on a strategic basis. How are organisations going to design a customer engagement strategy? And that's pretty fundamental to what you are as a business. So I think this is going to be a subject that runs and runs.
Absolutely. And just to move the conversation on a little bit, and Phil, I think we'll probably start with you on this one. So companies or financial institutions have very much looked at compliance very much at point of sale to date. I think there's now a little bit of a shift into looking at more what needs to be considered after the sale. Have you got any thoughts on, I guess, tips and tricks for people to start thinking about looking at that entire life cycle of a customer rather than just at point of sale? Are we meeting our consumer duty requirements?
I mean, it's an interesting change in terms of the regulatory environment to focus as much on supporting the business or customer as selling to them. I mean, obviously, there are some quite sophisticated bits of technology now that particularly large banks are using to try and sell better. So they're using understanding, I think Alexa was talking about it before, but understand their customers better to sell better, more product. But that's not what Consumer Duty is about. I think the challenge, and I'm not sure I do have, but I think the challenge is how do you keep on top of your customer and the changes they experience, which can be very significant, and how do those fit with the product you sold them? Because let's face it, a lot of the financial services products we're selling are long term. So how do you keep abreast of those challenges and make sure that the product's still suitable? And actually in the speech in February, the FCA were very clear that is something that you need to do a lot better. So over time, is that product still the right product for the individual? And ultimately, it boils down to know your customer as well as you can and engaging with your customer so you can have that. And that will have to be proactive discussion about, are the customers changing? Are your customers changing? And therefore, do you need to think about different products that suit their needs better? So I think that's again part of your customer engagement strategy. What's the long-term approach to how do we maintain that dialogue and knowledge and understanding? Some tech, some real, whatever it may be. But that's going to be where people need to focus. Is how do I knit together that strategy in a way that guarantees a high level of support and understanding, so that I don't have those bad outcomes where someone wakes up and goes, "This is not the right product for me."
Yeah. I'll just build on that point, I think, Phil, because I think some of the listeners may find it a bit daunting, the thought of being overly reliant on technology and building out new capabilities, because it doesn't need to be difficult, but it does come with some degree of complexity to implement open banking, fintech solutions, and so on. And if you want to go for a much simpler solution, you said it yourself, talk to your consumers. But it's more than, I think, Ben, in your 4-point right at the beginning, you were talking about bespoke consumer surveys. I think it's going even a step further than that as well, because in surveys, customers will often tell us what they think that that we want to hear, rather than what's truly going on for them. And as we've already discussed, the opportunity with having a branch strategy, certainly for building societies, it means that you can speak to your consumers in person each day, and as part of their day-to-day lives, and that's what really brings it to life, to understand how does this product or service or what part in your life stage you're at impact you, and how do we show that we're being proactive in responding to that and driving that through our customer engagement strategy and future plans, because that's what the regulator's after, isn't it? It's not just the here and now, but how is this going to influence your development strategy going forward?
Manila, absolutely. I mean, Ben's point about there are actually some really simple things you can do, either in real or in tech, that don't cost a lot, that don't require massive plans of roadmap integration and huge structural change, that can make a difference today. Now, I would say this as chairman of docStribute, but could make a difference today very easily to the way you're engaging with customers in a tech sense or real sense. And I think it can be very daunting if you think about a 2-year core banking change or whatever it may be. These things are horrendous, but if you can find ways of just making quick changes that will deliver better understanding of your engagement and what your customers are thinking, that is an obvious thing, the route to go down.
Yeah,
and I think the FCA is going to look for those, because I don't think it's going to be good enough to say, well, our answer to Consumer Duty is we're going to replace our core platform, which is going to have more functionality and it will be ready in 2 years. I don't think that's going to work.
And I think just to build on that as well, just having this strategy that does combine and does allow the customer like self-disclosure, but you've also got to be in the background having that proactive, we've mentioned this word a lot in the session, but that proactive strategy to go in and monitor those changing circumstances, income, family, whatever else is going on, employment status, and actually being able to then ask about that, but also going back to the cultural shift aspect that we've also touched on, is thinking about how we could move away from responding in the moment, this reactionary, and this, if take proactive nature to the extreme, and design inclusive by default. So actually you have that adaptability in your products and services right from the get-go, which will be easier moving forward now because we've been gathering all this data, all this customer information. We can take that inclusive by default approach. And I think that is the cultural shift that the FCA ultimately want to see.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everybody. Really great discussion. We've got a little bit of time for questions, and one's come through from Chris, which I've seen. So if people can post any questions they've got on the Q&A or the chat, we'll cover those. The first question to the group is, how can we choose outcome-focused data points that pass the so what test? So repackaging basically NPS or smart money people scores may not prove outcomes. So how can we make sure that we choose outcome-focused data points?
I would potentially say it comes down to the data strategy that we've briefly mentioned before, because I think it's a risky business to look at potentially one measure in relation to one outcome. You actually have to start combining several data points to see if your outcome is being achieved, or mitigating that foreseeable harm. I think it works both ways, but I do think, yeah, looking at several points, externally facing, internally gathered metrics, and that proactively sought customer experiential metric as well.
I think, I mean, it's a preventative strategy. So I think you start with what causes bad outcomes. And then what can you measure on the route to achieving that bad outcome, as it were, as in what caused bad outcomes before. And that can range as much from a KPI that understands fair value for a product and how that changes over time, but equally a KPI that understands, are your customers genuinely engaging and understanding what you're telling them? Because we know the bad outcomes are caused by people not necessarily understanding the product they buy when they buy it, or it changes over time so that it no longer fits. So these are clear reasons why. So I think you start with what caused the bad outcomes in the past, and then work from that as to what can you do to measure whether that's still happening or not going to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to build on those points, I think building societies are great, are actually understanding their customers' goals, aren't they, when it comes to saving and buying a home, and thinking about the KPIs in relation to customer needs and motivations can be another approach as well to add to that that we've seen to be effective.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think it's all about looking at all of the different aspects that you've got and really joining them together to tell the story, rather than looking at discrete pieces of data from a specific survey or a specific interaction. It's about joining the dots basically between all the different elements. So I'm just having a look if there's any other questions that have come through. So feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the Q&A. Otherwise, I've got one more question for the panel, which I'll come to, and it's probably one to answer in longer than 4 minutes, but I'm interested in short, snappy views. So is there anything that building societies can learn from any other industries outside of financial services around how to treat customers fairly? Because if you look at, obviously, building societies and financial institutions, it's a very specific engagement model currently. You look at some of the big tech players, there's a lot more touch points with customers. Is there anything that societies and institutions can learn from those other sectors that could be of use when trying to comply with consumer duty?
I mean, I would say that the best customer businesses are ones that maximize the customer service experience above all else in the business. So it's almost, if I do a great job for the customer, I'll make money somehow. And that's, I mean, it's a bit generic, but if you look outside financial services, the fastest growing, most successful, the businesses we love are ones that really prioritize you as a customer above profit. They may still make a lot of money, but they make it after they've given a fantastic service and a fantastic product. And that sounds very general, but I think that's a thesis which is very cultural. And we haven't really talked about culture that much, because the Building Society, I think, probably has a pretty positive culture in this regard. But I think that is a really important culture for financial services to really get its head around.
Do you know, a sector I think in the last few years has really transformed? It's actually the energy sector, and a lot of that's been driven from the regulations. But you think about the inertia in switching your utility provider, even 5-6 years ago, it's I mean it's not the same anymore, because your provider is proactively telling you can get a better deal elsewhere, either with us or with somebody else, and the switching process is so incredibly easy now. So I think there's something around that the financial services sector could learn from.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I think Octopus tell me that I need to switch tariff regularly based on my usage. Wouldn't it be great if something happened in your life and your mortgage provider said you could be moving on to a better product rather than waiting for it to come round for renewal and your broker being out in the market? I think you're spot on. Energy has done that well, quickly, and they're reaping the benefits of doing that and being the ones to treat customers like that.
It's a great example also of how to combine people and tech, because they do it really, they do that combination really well. So they do a lot of the legwork and a lot of understanding around the back to deliver a great personal service. It's a good example.
Brilliant. So I think that almost brings us to the hour. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for their attendance and also to the speakers and the panelists for their participation. A fascinating discussion. And I just want to quickly do a bit of a shameless plug for a couple of upcoming events which we've got. So we've got a session in person in London on Thursday, the 18th of April. And we're looking at fintech, FI integration whilst working with core system providers. So looking at that landscape, we've got some great panelists. There'll be food and drink at the event as well. So we'd love to see as many of you there as possible. We'll also be at the BSA conference in May, as will docStribute. So we'd love to have further discussions around consumer duty as a topic, or any other hot topics that you may have within your society. So please come and say hi to us at our various stands at the BSA conference as well. And keep an eye out on your socials. We'll be hosting other webinars around sort of some similar but slightly tangential topics as well in the coming months. So thank you everybody for your attendance. Thanks to the panelists, and I hope everybody has a fantastic Friday afternoon and weekend when it comes around.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks. Bye.